Hello, welcome or welcome back to the Yarn and Yarns YouTube channel. My name is Angela and all the places you can find me should be linked in the description box below this video. Here on the channel you'll find me chatting about my adventures in knitting, spinning, crochet and weaving, all of the fibre related things. Today's video is all about my stash and how it is time to say goodbye to some of it. Sad, it's sad, but also necessary. And I wasn't sure whether to sit and chat about this because I feel like how much yarn we have in our own personal stashes is a very personal thing, and there are people who sit on the spectrum from living totally stashless to having a huge stash of yarn that would rival any local yarn shop. And where you sit on that scale is entirely your choice, your preference, and I'm not casting judgment or commentary on how anyone else chooses to curate their collection of yarn, and so I wasn't quite sure whether to share this video, but I have chatted about stash before and I'll put a link to the video where I chatted about stash. Someone asked me in one of my videos previously, how do YouTube creators end up with so much yarn, and I had a little discussion about that, so yeah, I'll try to link that video up above. And I don't think it's a thing that is exclusively a YouTuber thing. I know lots of knitters who have a healthy stash of yarn who do not record videos for YouTube. But yeah, it's a very sort of personal topic, and so I didn't know whether to share this video. But part of this video is also about me organising my stash and also trying to get to a point where my stash reflects the knitter that I am right now. And I always enjoy hearing people chat about their organisational systems, and I also enjoy a good stash tour, so I thought why not just share this, let's put it out there. And I would love to know your thoughts in the comments below about whether you have any sort of limits that you put on yourself in terms of your yarn stashing or your fibre stashing, and how you like to organise the yarn that you do have, the yarn that you do bring into your home. So yeah, as we go along, please do let me know in the comments below your thoughts on any of this, because I am always really interested to chat with other makers about these sorts of things. So why have I decided to try and reduce the amount of yarn that I've got? Well, I think there are two main reasons. Now, the first is a space issue, and the second is about me wanting to create a stash of yarn that reflects who I am as a knitter at the moment. Actually, that second point might be the sort of easiest one, or the shortest sort of point to answer or to speak about. So I have now been back into knitting in a sort of serious, obsessive way for at least a decade. Over that time, I have had varying amounts of disposable income, and have accumulated yarn at various rates. However, I have been in a privileged position where I have been able to accumulate yarn faster than I can use it, obviously, because otherwise I wouldn't be sitting here in front of a whole cubby full of yarn with extra yarn piled up around me. And skeins that I bought 10 years ago for projects that I enjoyed knitting 10 years ago are not necessarily and yes, I do have yarn that has been in my stash that long, but those skeins do not necessarily reflect the sort of projects and the sort of colours and the sorts of fibres that I enjoy working with right now. My favourite colour is orange, but I also enjoy autumnal colours, so I love greens, I love browns, I love all of the colours really, but there are certain colours that I'm drawn towards more than others, and I'm sure that's true for many of us. We all have our sort of favourites, and some people have colours they actively don't like. I don't have that, but I do have colours that I'm more drawn towards. And I went through a phase of trying to make sure when I was adding to my stash that I was adding lots of different colours, so I wasn't just buying oranges and greens and browns. However, those skeins, although I have used some of them in the past, and I have now got accessories and garments in a variety of different colours, and I enjoy that, I do have skeins that sit in my stash because really they're not what I enjoy knitting. And my knitting, again, I'm in a privileged position where my knitting is all about enjoyment and relaxation and wanting to spend time doing the things that I love. So there are certain skeins in my stash which just sit there because they're not really what I love, and I bought them at the time. I don't have any regrets about any of my stashing habits in the past, and I don't have any regrets about supporting makers and small businesses, but I now know myself a little bit better as a knitter. Where in the past it was easy for me to buy a single skein of 4-ply yarn, I thought, oh yeah, at least I'll knit that up into socks at some point. I now know that my preference for sock yarn is not necessarily the merino nylon blends that indie dyers often produce, not exclusively but often. I prefer the slightly harder wearing sort of opals, West Yorkshire spinners. So I've got a huge stash of single skeins of yarn that I have accumulated thinking I would knit socks, and now I know that my sock preference is not for that yarn. Of course I could use those yarns in other projects, however I've got a ton of shawls and I have recently moved away from wearing shawls a little bit, so that sort of doesn't reflect who I am as a knitter right now. And so from that point of view, I think it's just time to let some of these things go, and the joyful thing about creating is that there'll be someone else who will joyfully receive some of the skeins of yarn that I've got in my stash and make them up into beautiful things, which to me is a much better prospect than them just sat in, you know, plastic bags being protected from dust and moths and cat hair, but never being used. So yes, I would really like to get to a point where my stash reflects who I am as a knitter right now, and obviously that's an ever-changing thing, but that could mean that my stash is ever-changing, and there's nothing wrong with that. As I say, as long as I've got the means to spend money on yarn, then I will continue to do so. This is not about not spending money on yarn. This is about trying to make my current stash work for me right now. So yeah, that's the first reason I want a stash that reflects my knitting and my creating life as it is now, not as it was. And I think that's really where my stash is at. It sort of reflects where I was in my knitting and creative journey 5 years ago, as opposed to where I am right now. I've not really been buying too much yarn for the past couple of years because I haven't had as much, because one, I haven't had as much disposable income, and two, I've ended up with this big stash of yarn, and I'd already started thinking about, you know, what do I need as opposed to what do I want. Going back to the first point, which is the more pressing issue for me, it is that my stash has far outgrown the space that I really have to accommodate it. We moved into this house 6 years ago, and when we first moved in, I bought these 2 sets of cubbies from IKEA, which means I've got sort of 8 of these storage cubbies, for want of a better way to explain it. And when we first moved in, my stash fit in those just about. But now I've got that, and I've got several of these totes out here in this room, as well as a couple of bags of yarn that I can see scattered around, and I know that in my cupboards I've got 2 or 3 more totes full of random yarns. I mean, not all of it's full skein, some of it has been used, some of it's leftovers, but I've got a lot of yarn, and I want to try and get back to my stash being housed in just these 2 sets of cubbies, which is going to be quite a big job, and it's not something that I'm necessarily setting like a time limit on. I think I'm going to aim to work towards this in the next couple of years, because realistically there are some things here that I'm happy to let go of, and I've already started that process, and we'll chat a little bit more about that in a minute. But also there are things that I'm not ready to let go of because, you know, I've got projects in mind for them, or they have some sort of sentimental attachment for me. They've been gifts from lovely friends, or they're just yarns that are absolutely beautiful and I know that I will want to use at some point. I just don't necessarily have a project in mind right now. So yeah, I don't want to let things go just for the sake of letting go and clearing out. I don't want to sort of self-pressure myself into letting things go that I know that I will use, or I know that I really want and like. Does that make any sense? But I need to reclaim some space. And you might be thinking, but Ange, you sit up in your craft attic, you've got a lovely big space. Within that space, how can you not have space for all of your yarn? And it's very true. I am very lucky to have a whole room in which I can house my craft things. However, the design of this room and the shape of this room is not super conducive to easily accessible storage solutions. So, let me just put this tote back. So whoever lived in this house before us converted the attic, and that's the space that I occupy now with all of my stuff. So the ceilings are sloping. I can really only stand up to my full height down the middle of this room, and down each side of this room are cupboards. And you might be thinking, hey, you've just said there's no easy storage, but you've got cupboards. But let me just swirl you around a minute and I'll show you what we've got. So this is one cupboard, and I've got 4 sort of cupboards around this room, but I'm currently sat on the floor, and as you can see, the cupboard is lower than my head when I'm sitting down. So I have to get on my hands and knees to access those cupboards, which is perfect for things that you don't necessarily need all the time. You know, we've got our Christmas tree up here, things like that. But for things that I do want to access, it's just really hard to keep going in and out of the cupboards on my hands and knees, dragging in boxes, pushing boxes back. It's just, yeah, it's just not easy. Okay, I don't need to access all of my yarn all of the time, but when I did a little bit of a tidy and a reorganisation towards the end of last year, I opened up one of those cupboards with the idea of putting away one or two of these totes, and when I opened up those cupboards, there's a whole bunch of stuff in there that I kind of knew I had, but I'd sort of forgotten about it because it's not in my face and I'm not looking at it all the time. So if I put things away in those cupboards, it's easy just to accumulate extra because I can't see, I'm not reminded constantly about what I already have. So it's not ideal keeping my stash in those cupboards. Yeah, the aim is to try and get back to a point where I've just got this as my yarn stash, but at the moment, as you can see, this is full. I've got at least 5 totes worth of other yarns scattered around the room. It's just time to do something about it. And I've already started the process because I have started listing some of my yarns on my destash page, and already I have rehomed at least 1 tote's worth of yarn by listing things on my destash page. I already had that set up for the Yarn and Yarns business because I've got a whole ton of stock to destash from when I had the shops. I'm also now utilising that to try and destash some of my own personal bits and pieces. So if I know lots of you already follow that Instagram page, so if you have rehomed any of the yarn that I've listed on my destash page over the last few days, thank you so much. I'll be listing some more in the coming days and weeks because I'm going to be working really hard to get to the point where I've only got yarn in those cubbies. Within the next 2 years, I'd like to get to the point either through destashing or through using my yarn. I'd like to get back to the point where my yarn is only in these cubbies and nowhere else. Does that mean I'm not going to be buying yarn? Absolutely not. Of course I'm going to be buying new yarn. I still want to support small business owners, indie dyers, small farm producers. I still want to do that, but I want to be a little bit more intentional about what I'm bringing in. I also, as I said earlier, want it to be a better reflection. Anything that I bring in, I want to be a better reflection of where I am as a knitter right now. I think I'm going to use my channel here as a little bit of an accountability thing, and I think I will check in every 6 months or so to see how this is going. I guess in order to figure out how well I'm doing in terms of reducing my stash, I need to figure out exactly how much I've got. So at this point, we've got these 2 sets of cubbies which are absolutely full, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 totes of yarn separate to that. And there's probably a couple of cardboard boxes in there which I haven't accounted for either yet. I'd have to pull everything out. But if we say this and 5 totes of yarn is my starting point, and then we can sort of check back in maybe in 6 months' time to see how well I'm doing in terms of reaching my stash / storage goals. I also think it might be quite fun. I might do a separate video for some skeins in my stash that I'm on the fence about, if that makes sense. There are things, so I've been going through my stash. I'm not sure how coherent this video is, but I've been going through my stash. Let's grab this one because it's out, and basically fondling every skein of yarn and trying to decide, do I have a project in mind for this? If I do, then it goes automatically in the yes, I'm keeping it. If I don't, is there something about this yarn which makes it precious to me? Either has it been gifted? Does it have some sort of sentimental attachment to it in terms of, you know, did I buy it while I was on holiday? Is it a souvenir skein from some special trip? Is it just too beautiful to let go of? Is it, you know, just a really me skein of yarn that I know at some point the perfect project will come along for? And if the answer to any of those is yes, then I'm keeping it. If the answer to all of those is no, then I'm destashing it. If there's anything in between, then I'm probably going to keep it for the time being. But what I might do is pick out maybe say 5 to 10 skeins of yarn, make a separate video about those, and my goal might be to try and use those within the next year. And if they haven't gone within the next year, then I let them out into the world. I don't know. What do you think of that idea? It appeals to me. So it'll be kind of like 10 yarns that will self-destruct in a year. As in, find their way out of my house. I have to destash them if I haven't used them. So yeah, I think I need to set some sort of fun challenges around this task. Otherwise, I may end up just holding on to everything, because I love each and every one of my skeins, and I'm a little bit sad to let some of them go. But yeah, it's time. It's time. So yeah, I think that's everything for this video. It's been a bit rambly. It's been a bit chatty. But yeah, I have goals. And I'm hoping you will all encourage me along the way to try and meet these, and let me know your thoughts. Any comments below are always welcome, but let me know your thoughts on stashing, on organising, and yeah, just tell me about yarns that make your heart happy. If you happen to have yarn in your stash that perhaps doesn't speak to who you are as a knitter right now, let me know what you do with them. Just, yeah, all of the things around yarn, organisation, stashing, just leave them in the comments below, because I love to hear from you. Right, I'm going to sign off. I think this video might be a little bit of a hot mess, but hopefully enjoyable to watch, and there might be some conversations to have. So, and just to once again reiterate, this is not a judgment. If you've got 1,000 skeins of yarn, if you've got 1 skein of yarn in your stash, I'm not judging, I'm not commentating on how you store or collect your yarn. This is just a personal thing about how I want to go forward with things in the future. There will be more yarn buying, there will be more yarn acquisition, but I hope that it will be a little bit more intentional, and my little wall of yarn here will end up reflecting my personality a little bit better than I think it does right at the moment. Thank you so much for listening to my ramble, for spending time with me today. I will be back again soon with some more making content here on the channel, so I hope you will join me for the next video. But until we do get to spend time together again, I hope you get to do some other things that you enjoy. Great big woolly hugs to you all. Bye for now.